Greetings, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us again. I'm Louise McCormick, the president of the Plymouth Historical Society. This is the beginning of our third season of the program, Memories of Plymouth, where we invite our elders to come to us, or we go to them and ask them to share their stories, their thoughts, their memories of the time that they've had in Plymouth. They could have been born here, gone to school here, had a business here, or just socialized. We're hoping that the more the stories are told, it tells you how important our community is, what a community is, and our part in a community. Person that we're interviewing today is Charles McLeod. So I want to thank you, Charlie, for your willingness.
You're welcome.
To have me in your household for I don't know how many hours. My eyes are going, it's been many, many hours. I have a series of questions that I'll be asking you throughout. And the first questions will be about you, your family, your siblings, etc. And then we'll get into special topics.
Okay.
If that's all right with you.
Yes.
Simple ones first, I promise. Are you ready?
Yep.
What is your complete name?
Charles Robert McLeod.
Are you a namesake? Are you named after somebody?
An uncle.
An uncle.
Charlie Kimball.
Carl Kimball, all right.
Who lived in Thornton on Millbrook Road.
And your dad's name?
Marilyn Everett McLeod.
All right. And then that's the name of the original business that your dad had as well? M.E. McLeod.
Yes, yep. Only he used just the initials. M.E. McLeod.
All right. All right. And your mom?
Martha Agnes Kimball McLeod.
Kimball. All right.
So she was a sister to my uncle who I was named after.
All right, all right. Do you have siblings?
Yes. We have 3 children. Debbie being the oldest, Francis and Robbie. Now, Debbie went on to become involved with the educational field. She now is in Manchester and is working with the dairy school there in Manchester. Francis took up mechanics. He worked for me for several years. After I retired, he started his own business as certified appliance repair. Robbie, he is in the mechanical field too, and for a lot of years he owned his own shop in Colorado. He moved here and is now a caretaker for his partner. She is real bad off, so he assumed that responsibility on his own.
Wow. Wow. Do you mind if I ask how old you are, or?
No.
Or you can just give me your birth date and they can figure it out.
No, I was 5'10", 33, so that makes it 85 years.
85 years.
Yeah.
Where were you born?
In Thornton, New Hampshire, at home. My folks owned a 25, 30 acre farm, and then at that particular time, most all children were born at home, and I think there probably was a nurse present. But other than that,
how about your schooling? Was your schooling in Thornton as well?
Yep. Well, the first 5 years, 6 years of school were in a one-room school where my aunt taught, and you had a potbelly stove to give you the heat. There was no running water. Water had to be lugged from the neighbor who lived next door, morning and to fill up the crock pot there that sat on the counter so that you could have a drink if you wanted. The heat, as I said, was that potbelly stove, which the older children in the class kept going and probably started early in the morning.
Charlie, what would be the classes? Is this first grade
This
through
is
sixth grade?
1 through 8.
1 through 8, thank you.
And probably at the most there was 20 students through the grades.
Wow.
Each class would have its own lessons, then should proceed to the next class and the next. And of course, being a one-room school, even the youngsters picked up a lot from the olders just listening to their...
Was there a bathroom there? I think I had a note that said, no, there was not.
No, there was not. It was a two-hole, I'll say, outhouse built on the rear of the school.
You're shocking me, just so you know that.
Yeah, facts are facts.
What was it like going to a one-room schoolhouse, multi-age teaching?
It was basically almost like, this is our family.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
everybody knew everybody, of course, real well. And if they had grievances, they could pick them, and everybody got along.
So, you made a comment to me once that you initially were in Thornton, then you moved to Plymouth and continued your education down there. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was that, what kind of a transition was it when you go from Thornton to Plymouth? Small school, small numbers?
Yeah. Then we moved down here, which it was like going from Plymouth to Manchester.
Sure.
You know, all these people that you took probably half a year to learn Bob and Billy and John and this one and that one. And of course, these children had all grown up together, so here's a little kind of a clique here, and it was hard to get inside of that and make real good relationships. But it was at the Spear Memorial building on School Street. Across the road was the high school, and I attended there, graduated from there, went to the high school there, graduated from there, and then was fortunate enough to be able to go down to UNH.
I don't want you to talk about, let's put UNH over to the side for a second. I'm thinking of where you are at the high school, the junior high, and the elementary. And at that time, would you have had cars and trucks on Summer Street driving? Can you remember that?
I don't think they were allowed to pass there during the daylight hours. There may have been a few, but only the buses were there. And of course, up to the 8th grade, we were picked up at the farmhouse here by the school bus and returned each evening for the school bus. The high school students could purchase a pass, and they would let them board the bus and bring them down same time as they brought the grade school kids.
Okay. Well, same time.
Yeah.
Same time.
Yeah.
All right. All right. That's interesting. You said to me that D&M Park became our playground. Would you expand on that a little bit?
Okay. Around, in the center of the town, the only playground that was there was the one between the high school and the memorial building, which wasn't much bigger than my lawn. So there wasn't a lot of room there. So everybody, if they were playing sports, you know, baseball, football, whatever it might be, were allowed to walk down the sidewalk, cross the street, cross the bridge, and walk to D&M Park. Mm-hmm. And very few summer games were played there school-oriented. They were, you know, the football and baseball, that was about it. There was no soccer, lacrosse, some of these others that they make
have
available now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep. You shared with me some of the coaches that you had. Can you come up with a couple of their names? But I can look at my notes too.
Harry Lehman.
Yeah.
He was coached basketball, football, and baseball.
Baseball. Mm.
And plus he had some duties as a teacher. And but he was real good. Mm-hmm. And
how did he stand out? If he was real good, what does that mean to you? Why was he so good in the world of sport?
Well, he had more of a, I want to say, human touch rather than just a number or a figure here. And he would kind of figure out what he needed to do to help you become better or participate. And he was one that would stress participation in, if it wasn't any more than intramural sports, which there was a lot of that going on in the Spear Gym. Mm-hmm. We would have basketball, wrestling, tumbling, and...
So although that was an elementary building where the gymnasium was, we still had our high school students going over and using that gymnasium.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. All the home games were there, of course. Yeah. And so, yeah, they shared it, and it seemed to work fairly well.
You said to me one of your really good friends during the high school era was?
Bobby Elliott.
All right.
And he was a real good partner. Mm-hmm. And he and I still converse today. He lives in Florida in the winter, and then he moves up to Lake Winona in the summer. And he and I played ping pong together noontimes. See, back then they broke for a long noon hour, probably an hour or better. So it was taking our lunch. He took his because he lived in Lorentoville, and he would take his, I had mine. We'd eat lunch, and then we'd play ping pong. We played thousands of games in the top floor of the old high school. Mm-hmm. And
did you share with me accurately, you were champions?
Yes, we
you say it like it's a downer.
He and I were the doubles champion, and I was fortunate enough to win the singles champion. Mm.
Very neat, very neat. And you still converse today?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And you said to me, what extracurricular sports did you play throughout high school?
Other than intramural, I didn't have the time. We lived here. We depended on, in high school, you depended on somebody bringing you and bringing you back, unless you were fortunate enough to have a car in the family or something.
Right. But I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Being a person who walked to school, went home at lunch, I figured everybody was like me until I started to have friends who lived in the outlying towns. And they really had to sacrifice. I mean, they had to leave early to catch the bus to get home. You had duties sometimes.
Yep. And with us, growing up, we were taught we had to help in order to survive on the farm. So we would get up earlier than usual, milk the cows, clean up, go to school, return in the afternoon to do the same thing while we're going to school. And of course in the summer there was haying to do and farming. We were real fortunate when we moved down here. We went from a 25, 30 acre farm to 100 acres tillage and 100 acres woodland. We also, when we lived in Thornton, had beef cattle. Here we went to milkers that seemed to be a better income for a while. And then it became more and more regulated price-wise and whatnot. So when I originally came down here from Thornton, there were probably 8 or 10 farms on the Fairgrounds Road alone, plus those that were in other districts of Plymouth. But through the years, gradually, one by one, it just wasn't the money there, so they were forced to do something different.
Or in addition.
Yeah.
Was there a farm here prior to you living here?
Yes.
The name of it?
It was the Glover Farm.
All right.
And they lived real long lives. And, of course, back then, the health situation, doctors and nurses and home health and all that, that wasn't thought of, so they more or less looked after one another. Oh. And they lived there just as long as they possibly could without doing much labor. So when we came down here, all of the surrounding fields, growing up with moss and goldenrod, and so immediately my father realized, well, the boys are old enough if they had equipment to do it with. We can't do it with horses because they couldn't harness the horses, or it wouldn't really be a real safe situation. So he invested in Ford tractors, which were one of the first ones to have what they called a 3-point hitch, which meant that you had just 3 points to hook up to a different attachment, be it a plow or a harrow or cultivator. So even us little guys could do that. So he invested in tractor, and he was not one to sit back and wait for something to happen. If something new came out, a new way of doing things, as far as equipment or a piece of equipment that we could use, he would buy it. So as little guys, we plowed, harrowed, and immediately the fields went from stuff that was this high and weeds to real good hedge grass that was up almost shoulder high.
Wow.
Also to supplement his income, because even though we milked about 40 head of cattle night and morning, it was not enough to really support the farm. So he would raise cash crops like potatoes, this whole field across from the house, which we planted with potatoes, and they were cared for there. And then in the fall, when it came time to dig them, he had a machine that would scoop that up. It would rattle up a chain drive conveyor, sort out the potatoes. The potatoes would be laying on the top of the material that was dug up with this digger. And after a little bit sitting there in the sun, we would pick the big potatoes, and he set up a scale right across, basically from my house here, and would sell a good share of the potatoes right out of the field.
Oh. Wow.
The little potatoes were all bagged and stored for winter feed for the animals, mostly the pigs.
You talked about, I think, your brothers. Is that correct? The boys. You talked
Yes.
about the boys. How many brothers did you have?
2.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. They were both older than I. Later on, we were blessed to have 2 sisters. And they worked along with us, either sometimes driving tractor, sometimes picking up potatoes, whatever they could do, strength-wise and whatnot.
What other farms? Can you name some of the farms that were on Fairgrounds Road?
Well, starting down the road here at the corner, there was the Sutherland Farm, the Sorrell Farm, the Hart Downing Farm, the Avery Farm. Then you get up this way, there was the MCLOUD Farm. Next door was the Worthen Farm. Next door to that was the Moulton Farm. And next door to that was the Hammond Farm. Now, most all of these farms at that time were producing milk and dealing with cattle more than anything. But when that became economically prohibitive, different groups went different ways. My father elected to, in the winter, plow snow, and in that time frame, which was in the early 40s, we as 12, 13-year-old children were able to run the tractors on the road legally.
Legally.
Because there was no help available because of the war effort. So I can remember loading snow in the main street of Plymouth. Them in the town trucks, they would haul it over and dump it in the Pemmichwas River right there beside the bridge. Also, I can remember going into your father's store, my feet half froze, and standing on the big radiator that was against the wall to warm my feet.
I remember that too.
Yeah. But, so we done different things to go along with the farming. Eventually,
16, wow.
it became really recognizable that farming was not the way to go, that they had to, and not on the scale that we were able to. So that's when we got involved with construction.
Is that before? Have you gone to UNH yet?
This is before I went to UNH.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, as I say, even as 12, 13-year-olds, we were operating the tractors on the roadway or wherever. And then eventually when we got licenses, my father got bigger equipment and better equipment. We built roads, dug cellar holes,
Wow.
all over in this general area. A lot of the work was done around the lakes, Lake Winnipesaukee, Squam Lake, White Oak Pond, and we would do that in the summer, go to school in the winter, and as I say, plow snow and whatever we needed to do.
Did you have any time to play?
Pardon?
During the summer, did you have any time to play? It just it seems like you're working all the time.
You know, you connive different ways of making time for whatever you really, really want to do.
And what would that be?
Oh, we'd play tag, we'd play baseball, we'd go out in the field, set up bases of our own, whatever, and croquet and whatnot.
You told me, I'm not sure everybody knows where you live, but I remember your comment about behind the house is a railroad track, correct?
It's behind my house. Yes. That ran from Boston on up through all the way to Woodsville and over into Vermont.
What's so unique about it?
Well, basically, when you originally moved here, there was a lot of freight, a lot of milk being hauled on the train, plus passengers. A big deal of their income came from even transporting all of the children that lived from Warren, Wentworth, Rumney, Quincy area down to Plymouth High. And they, of course, had to bring them back in here. So there originally was basically 5 trains that ran here. At the same time, the trains were running on up through to Lincoln on that line because the paper industry was going strong. Well, the paper industry closed down, so that railroad closed down. It became cost prohibitive for them to operate the milk trains, the freight, and all of that. So basically, this line went out. A telegraph office down to Railroad Square and all of that, it all went. So I think that is one of the biggest things early on that I remember happening is the way transportation changed because of lack of customers and because you could order it out of Boston today, throw it on the truck, tomorrow you'd have it. So it was next day delivery, even back then. So by truck, whereas if you came by rail or something, it wasn't going to be. And of course, we also had the paper mill there at Livermore Falls, which was part of the Lincoln network. That went out. So
that's right. You were
Beebe River went out.
All around the same time?
Yes, just about, yeah.
So you're lucky enough, fortunate enough to go to school, and you decide on UNH. What did you do at UNH? What were your studies?
Animal husbandry, basically. It involved the modern methods of keeping track of, which leads us to paperwork, which the old farmers, they wrote it on the side of the wall or something. But there was stressed the importance of paperwork. And if you were going to be in the dairy business, you had basically 4 breeds to pick from: Ayrshire, Jersey, Holstein. And it all depend on what you like. They had all 4 breeds represented there at the university. To give you an example, a year before I went there, they had a bull calf that was born, and the priest from Claremont bought it for $300. When, by the time I got to university, that bull was worth $10,000, $100,000. His semen was in demand statewide, and he was one monstrous bull. He weighed probably pretty close to a ton.
Is this the one that you called President?
That was the president.
President, wow.
Which, you know, in animal talk, everything is bloodline, which was the Echo. Echo was the name of the Holsteins that they first started with. And they built those. The confirmation to that bull, he didn't sag out like our bulls did. Mm-hmm. He was one almost straight across back. Mm-hmm. So the offspring picked up those characteristics, the butter fat and milk content and quantity was all up through their breeding of that Echo line.
So your intent was to continue what had been here before. You were going to be a farmer.
Yep. But by the time I got through college, my father had invested in construction equipment, knowing that there's more money to be made there, especially at that particular time when everything was booming. They wanted roads here, roads there. And wow. So and then, of course, circumstances run into this a little bit. Eventually, the 120-foot barn burned.
Where was that located, Charlie?
That was where the Mormon church is now.
Today?
Yes.
All right.
And of course, where we sat here in my house, this was the most easterly corner of the property. Okay. So that's where the land was available, so we built here. Mm-hmm. And
but because you had been brought up, the boys had been brought up, girls and boys had been brought up, knowing technology, construction, how to operate these machines, trucks, etc.
Yeah.
You moved into that area.
Yes.
More opportunity, more money.
More money, yep.
And
eventually, because he started in with smaller equipment.
Smalls.
Matter of fact, I think the first power shovel we had was a 3/8. The last one we owned was a 5/8.
You think I know what that is?
No, cubic yard.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Also, along those same lines, I feel I have actually lived lots of different lives here. The farming.
That's right.
The schooling. I went in the military, and I was real fortunate there in that after 16 weeks of basic training and advanced infantry training, we were all shipped to South Carolina and went through a processing center there. At that particular time, they were changing over Camp Stewart in Georgia, and they needed operators real bad. Well, the guy that was processing mine says, "You've had some experience in construction?" Yes. I said, "Well, wouldn't you rather be doing that?" And I says, "Yes." "Well, but I haven't the right," they called it MOS, which was a classification. So he said, "Oh no, we can change that." So he erases out the one that's there, writes in, I think it was 3064 or whatever it might be, and says, "Okay, you can go down to Georgia." Well, I went down to Georgia. They were really pushing to develop that base. So basically, we done very little soldiering. It was like a civilian job. Go to work at 8, quit at 5. And building roads and
So it trains you for what you're going to end up doing when you come home.
Bigger equipment, you know.
Bigger equipment.
And nobody cared, or I would say nobody, very little emphasis was placed on how many cables you might have broke learning to do this or that or the other. It was the Army, they had more, so. So it was just almost like a civilian job. Then it was in the fall, around Christmas time, that we had pretty much completed what was there in Georgia. They shipped us up to Camp Stewart, to Fort Dix. Process there. They wanted to get us out of the States before Christmas, so I was fortunate to go overseas. So I was flown into Germany, from Germany transferred down to France. There was the same situation as it was in Georgia. They were building that air base over to accommodate all these flyers that were coming in, because they had a tremendous long runway there, so the big equipment in the Air Force could land there. And these guys that had all this education as far as flying was concerned had to have a place to live, and to entice them to bring their families with them, they were building trailer parks over there for these people. So that's what we were doing there, and it was almost a 8 to 5 job there for a long time.
And it's a nice place to travel to view. Did you have the opportunity to travel through the service?
After a little while in France, opportunity came down, and they needed to have some students to what they called Dozer Scraper School up in Germany. So I was picked to go up there. So I went up there for, I guess probably it was almost 2 months up there. So it was in Rhine-Main, Germany. And a real up and coming beautiful base. And I felt real fortunate now as I look back that I had these opportunities to go to UNH, to go to the service, and I probably would have made a career out of the service if it hadn't been for the rules and regulations that they enforce. In other words, if something happened in the company, they didn't have people pointing to you or you or you, or they didn't have the personnel to sort out you or you. So the whole company stood punishment for something some oddball done. Well, that goes against my grain. If I do something wrong, I should fetch up to it. If you do something wrong, you should. So I really, because I had made grade real easy in there, and I was in charge of the platoon as just as corporal, where there was SFCs and all these others there that have more rank than I have, and I'm telling them what to do. Well, I'd rather be pulling levers and operating equipment than I would telling you and you what to do. So I said, no, I guess not.
You said to me that your father repaired a lot of chainsaws, and you got involved when you got out of the service.
Yes.
You and Ike Trajano worked together on some projects.
Yeah. Ike was, of course, was a surveyor, and he and my dad got along real well. Matter of fact, Ike was instrumental in developing Fox Park, which we got that bid that job off and cleaned that out and developed that area there. And Ike was instrumental in there. So he and my father developed quite a bond between them. And he came across a piece of property on Big Squam Lake, which was undeveloped. So my father, with his foresight, even though he only went as far as 8th grade.
So he never went to high school?
Never went to high school, never went to any college or anything. But as one guy later on told me, says, well, he was not book smart, he was street smart. Because my father had the foresight and the wherefore to see what could happen to this or that. Yeah.
It's a gift.
So between us, we developed the project on Squam Lake, which ended up, originally you could have had maybe 1 or 2 lots there on right off Route 3. When we finished developing there, which we dredged out a big area, and this is where I put to work the expertise I acquired in the service, because I ran a drag line for weeks at a time in there. And so we dragged out this area, and matter of fact, after a while, put a coffer dam across and pumped out the cove itself so that we could get it cleaner. And he ended up with 33 or 4 lots.
Wow. Wow.
It was real profitable for him, and
what a vision. What a vision.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really neat. That's neat.
Well,
I'm going to bring up a word that you shared with me one time, and I kept going. I went home and I mulled over it. Noxus? I'm taking this out of context right now.
Oh.
Is it Noxus?
Nox Hole.
Nox Hole. For the audience, for anybody that knows as little as I do about farming.
All right. This was just a little old road that ran up through the woods. This was in Thornton, off from 175. And it ran up in the woods for probably 3 or 4 miles. Well, when the animals got useless as either meat or supplying power to do something, rather than have to bury them on their own land, they would lead them up this rolled up to Nox Hole, knock them in the head, and let the wildlife take care of it.
And this isn't just your family. This
no, this was a whole region up there.
It just stayed with me so long. I thought we ought to bring it to our audience as well. I thought it was okay.
Now, I don't know, I haven't been up there in quite some spell, how much that might or might not have been developed. I think the government, under the White Mountain Purchase, probably bought a good share of that. So it became government land up there.
Okay. I have a group of topics that I'd like to talk about the town of Plymouth, perhaps, and have you respond. And if you want to pass at any time, that's fine too. Are you willing?
Sure.
Okay, let's do it. Do you have reflections on living in near the town of Plymouth as a child, as a youth, as an adult? Can you remember something that stayed with you after all these decades?
Yeah. Well, one thing that did was the number of filling stations there was on the main street of Plymouth. Wow. I mean, I think at one time there was 12, 13 maybe, between North Main Street and South Main Street. Every little corner had a filling station, because back then the cars had to have points, plugs, condensers, tires were an item, oil changes, and all of that. Well, as things went along, longer time in between oil changes. The cars were better. They went from points condensers to electronic ignition.
Didn't need it.
It eliminated
Sure.
all these filling stations, and you didn't need all these filling stations just pumping gas, because they were getting way more miles to the gallon
Sure.
now than they did before. And in the beginning, nobody really cared that much, because gasoline was 25 cents a gallon. So, but
25 cents. 25 cents.
yeah,
We won't tell you what it is. We should tell you. How much is gas going for right now?
well,
Wow.
324 or 5.
Okay. Okay. No comments. Childhood memories. Weather. Floods. Do you remember any of those that have stayed with you for a reason?
Yeah, I remember being in Thornton in the 38 flood.
38.
And I remember the farm up there was situated, the buildings were on a kind of a plateau that went out and dropped down to Interville land. And that was way above flood state. But the lower Interville, I can remember seeing the whole thing all flooded.
Wow.
I was just a real young kid then. We moved down here. We didn't have really that bad a flood per se, not like that one was, that done boodles and boodles of destruction. But there were different times when the Interville would flood. I can remember looking at pictures. I didn't see this myself, but there was an underpass coming out of town, and that was the flood stage had brought it halfway up that underpass.
Wow.
So it closed down just about everything there in what where the common man is and all of that. It would flood the Intervilles out here, but there was nothing down there other than pasture land or hayland, so it didn't hurt that
That's
much.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
Fires.
Okay, because as I say, the barn burned, and then later on, it happened to be the day before Christmas, my shop burned. The local community the next morning was here, what can we do? They put a cement floor into the sheds that were still standing, redone the interior of it so it was warm, put in a stove, and those were all local people.
Did you expect that?
No.
Wow. Wow.
But what a boost it was to us, so that within really 2 or 3 weeks we were right back in business.
That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing.
Oh,
I mean, that's
and
what
it's
you want to remember.
unreal.
When you talk about community, that's what you want to talk
Yeah,
about.
and there was no campaigning to get a group together or raise funds.
Just came.
It was all, hey, just everybody got together themselves and says, hey, we're going up. They were here.
Wow. Wow. That's pretty special.
Yeah.
That's pretty special.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, through the years, I've seen some real special people. And they all didn't have to be millionaires. There was some of them that did have the means and wherefore, who I become friends with. One is Hilton Batchelor,
Hilton
who
Batchelor.
owned Batchelor Tree.
They were located on the main street.
Yep.
Okay.
And his house was up on Emerson Street. I would pick him up and, where do you want to go fishing, Batch? Go wherever you want, oh boy. So we'd go away from the shop for the afternoon, leaving the work to my wife, my sons, and we'd go fishing. And there was another individual. He was way up in age. He had made his fortune in Mass in the floral business, and back during the war. Some other things enter in it. He showed up at my shop to buy saws and do his mechanical work. I become real good friends with him. He'd say, well, I'm gonna be here tomorrow. We're going out to lunch. I said, I can't, Paul. I gotta run. No, let the boys run it away.
Did you hear that, Lois? Did you hear that?
Yeah. He's going to take me out to lunch. So I jump in his car. We go out. We head down 93. We're down to Tilton, going on down. We go clear to Nashua.
For what?
To a special place he had gone to. Was called Greenland's Turkey Farm. They had, unreal, the restaurant they ran. The food was good, but the time, I had to do that. And at one point, later on, I really ashamed of myself at the time, after this happened. We went to a small hamburger joint over here, and so I said, well, I had a good week. I'll pay, Bob. Oh, no, you can't pay. I brought tears to this old guy's eyes, because it's the one thing I can do. I can't do much else, but I can take you to dinner and do this for services you've rendered. And
that brought him great joy.
Yep.
Yep.
So I never offered again.
Oh, that's neat.
Those are some of the things that...
You said to me one time, there's 3 things that are important to me to share to other people that have been important in my life. What are those 3 things?
Well, one was, as I say, December 20th, 53.
53.
When I took Lois as my wife. It will be 66 years this fall. The other is
wow,
a poem that I wasn't aware of when it happened, but later on was brought to my attention, that was written by one of my granddaughters. She entitled it A Mile Down Fairgrounds Road. A Mile Down Fairgrounds Road. Yeah. And it went on to pay tribute to Lois and I.
Wow. Already.
The other was, at one point, my daughter-in-law was up to see me in the spring of the year when I was getting ready to plant the garden. And so she wanted to, because she moved up here from Everett, Mass. So she had very little knowledge of farming or whatnot. So I showed her and told her. Well, later on, as the summer progressed, everything done real well in the garden. And she showed up again. And I said, hey, would you like some corn for supper? You got corn ready? I said, yeah. So how do I go about this? Well, here, you grab the stalk, you pull the ear down, you husk it, and you take it home in about 11 minutes, or 7 to 11, whatever suits your taste best, in boiling water, and you'll have fresh corn. So I started picking, and I was picking for us, my family, for supper. So I said, well, you can pick your own. You just pull it down. I start up a row, and I'm working along. I hear a scream. I look over to my right, and she's running away from the garden, and I see this ear of corn go in the air. And I said, oh, a bee must have stung her. And I said, I hauled her down and I calmed her down. Says, what's the matter? Well, one of those ears of corn has got a worm in it, this long.
A worm in it.
A worm. Well, that
I'm
was
not sure you want this on tape.
that was the beginning of her introduction to the farm. So she said, you know, I could make a project for my first graders, because she had gone to school here in Plymouth. She became the first grade teacher. She is probably in her 23rd or 4th year in the school system. Well, she says, I could bring my first graders over here. I said, sure. So it began with just 13 or 14 first graders. Well, the season is just backwards to accommodate the school system, because the kids go to school as first graders in the fall. Well, in the fall, all the vegetables are already ripe and ready for harvesting. So they show up and, well, they harvest the corn, the carrots, the beets, tomatoes, and all this, but they never did, at first, see where this all started. So I talked it over with my daughter and I said, well, and the other thing we ran into is her class, which was 3 first grades in the school, but only her first graders would come over here. And I said, well, we can't, and they'd come back, and of course they were dirty and grimy and whatnot, and here's these other kids that were envy because they didn't get to go.
Why aren't we going?
So I said, okay, bring the whole first grade. Now we got to get the second grade involved, because after the first year, they will come back in the spring and do the planting, but they never will return to see what came of this, of all their labor. So we got them involved in coming first grade, second grade, spring, fall. They would pick the corn, Lois would cook it for them. The different parents and Lois would do a bunch of baking so that they had muffins and the corn and all this, and they could see from nature, from the ground, from this little seed, what can happen. So we got involved with planting pumpkins. At first we just planted a few. It would be nice, every kid to have his pumpkin. So then we, across the street, I owned that, so we tilled that and planted that. So the kids planted pumpkins over there.
Wow. In
the fall, when they came back, there'd be kind of a competition amongst them to pick their own pumpkin. So we would count down and they'd all take off in the pumpkin patch. Some would, the pumpkins were so big they couldn't, these little guys couldn't pick them up. So it'd say, just stand by it. So she came with a system whereby she could put a pin with her name on it to name the pumpkin for the kid. We would load these in back of the pickup with the help of the 7th and 8th graders that came over to help. Bring them over to school and line them up the sidewalk going from the school, down by the school, up to the parking lot. We'd line both sides of that.
So
and they would go from one end to the other, pretty much both sides. Then after school, kids would pick them up and bring them home.
So this is what we call Charlie's Gardens.
Yeah.
So I want to share. This is what just one class did for you. Charlie's Gardens. This is Mrs. Hunter's class in 1996 as an example.
Yes.
And then inside we have thank yous to Charlie and Lois for allowing them to come here and to learn the process of seeding and from seed to produce.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's when we were at one of these years that we were invited over to the first grade. All the first graders came in one room, and they served us coffee and a little lunch. Then they said, we got a special surprise for you. And so they said, we have derived a song in your honor, yours and Lois. So that is one of the times when I should have been laughing, but I was crying.
That is so neat.
It touched me because the song starts out, every day counts in Charlie's Garden. It goes on to tell about Lois made muffins and served us corn. It was a real touching song, through all derived from the teachers, the parents, and the college, basically Trish Lindbergh. So years and years later.
How many years did you do it for?
We'd done it 20 years. 20
years.
Yes.
Wow.
And then circumstances arrived. I couldn't do it anymore. But through those 20 years, all these little children that went, like they have a habit of doing, going from here to here, they'd be in the hospital, downtown, singing this song. and there are a lot of adults in this town who were here, and I'm sure if you were to ask any one of them what they remember the most, they remember that song.
That is great. That is great. What a memory you have given them. Yeah, they'll never forget. They'll never forget.
And it was great for us. I love little children. We were fortunate enough to have, as I say, 3 children of our own. They gave us grandchildren. We have 9 grandchildren.
Wow.
And I think the count is up to 8 great-grandchildren. And we don't see them all the time, but we see some of them.
Do they call you something, do they say Charlie, Grandpa's Charlie, or is there a special name at all that you folks have?
Not really. No? They will make a difference between the other grandparents and us, called Grandpa Charlie. Or maybe.
Sure.
But no. And of course, we're fortunate to have one of my sons live right next door.
Oh, that's great.
So his children were closer to us because they were here more than the others. I mean, some of them were in Colorado, some were down in Mass, so it was kind of hard to see them every other day. Whereas those down the street, they grew up, and once the railroad went out, that was an ideal spot for them to leave their house, cross the road, walk up the railroad track to our back lawn.
You talked about your business, how much pride you had in the business, that you took in the business. Can you chat just a little bit about that?
Yes, I had health problems that almost eliminated continual work on construction. So, and my father was reaching an age where he was ready to do something different than work all the time. So he was able to sell his construction business. I bought the chainsaw business from him, which when we first bought it, probably, we would sell maybe 50, 75 saws a year. They were all brand X. Well, along come the foreigners and said, we've got a better saw than you got. Of course, I had been brought up with the only two saws that were available was Light and MCLOUD, which were both American-made saws. But I say American-made saws, but a lot of parts within those were foreign-made. And when the pressure got put to me, because I'm investing in a foreign saw, I said, well, it's back on your doorstep. You think all the parts that are in your Light are built by Light? Oh, yes, yes. I said, well, let me tell you, the main bearing number for Light is such and such. And I'd just seen this, maybe a few months before, when I was really looking over a bearing to see why it failed, or trying to decide. And made in Japan, or wherever the place might be, but it was a foreign company, and it was the main bearing for their saw. I said, how can you condemn me when you're buying foreign? So anyway, I got involved with Tilton Equipment, who was a distributor for the Johnson Red chainsaw. Real fine people, real go-getters. Within just a few years, my sales had gone to 300 or 400 saws a year. Matter of fact, I have a plaque that was given to me at one dealer meeting. We were the first $1 million in sales east of the Rockies.
East of the Rockies.
For Tilton Equipment. And it actually won us a trip to Sweden. Everything paid. All we had to do is get the airport and back. We went to Sweden for 10 days. Went to Denmark. Isn't that where we had reindeer?
Copenhagen.
Cape Copenhagen. But they had reindeer. No, I'm thinking of reindeer. I'm not much of a game. I never was much of a hunter, so, and different game I ate. But that had to have been one of the best meals I've had. Was that reindeer. So.
Charlie, if we had a group of young adults around here, you have 80 plus years worth of wisdom of living. What would you tell these folks? What would you like to share with them? Not telling them what to do, but just share.
Well, in my lifetime, I've seen tremendously progress made in a lot of different fields. First, it was the road building and transportation. I can remember as a youngster going to Boston with my aunt and uncle. Took us 7 hours to get from here to Cambridge. Now you can do it in 3 because we have 93 and
That's right.
all these other roads. The other thing is the tremendous advancement in electrical gadgets of different types. The computer, the iPad, the cell phone, all of this in just my life, I can remember as a youngster, my father taking a comic book away from us. Says, don't read that trash. Well, that's talking about maybe so-and-so going to the moon and this and that and the other. Hey, we're there.
We're there. Mm-hmm.
Technology has really taken over. In some cases, it has eliminated a lot of jobs, yes. But in other cases, it's made it so much easier for management to control what's going on. So I would say right from the ground, the dirt, pay attention. This is where your food is going to come from. Now, they're going to prove me wrong. Later on, they're going to grow it out of a bucket here, some sort.
Hydroponics.
I'm sure.
Sure.
But through the years, I would say transportation and the invention of all this electronic business that's out there. And I would say go as far as you can, as long as you can in school. That is where you'll pick up. You may never use it, but at least you'll have it here, which, as a kid growing up, a zucchini? What's a zucchini? Never heard of it. Well, these kids will know. They were here. They saw these squash grow, the corn grow.
It's been a pleasure having the opportunity to videotape you today. I want to thank you for doing this. I enjoyed it. I think our audience enjoyed it. And maybe this should have been a 2 or 3 hour interview. But again, the hour and 15 minutes or so that we spent together, it's, I think I'm probably one of the luckiest people in the area to do these kinds of things, just videotape the stories that people have.
Well,
You take us back. You take us back, and I think that's important in order to think about, like you said, what the future is going to be for us.
yeah.
Really important.
Well, I often say in later years to myself, I was a farmer, I was construction, I went in service, I was fortunate enough to own my own business.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
so it's been a long, good ride.
Good ride. That's
Yes.
what I would say
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Thank you for the audience joining us today. Again, we were interviewing Charles McLeod, lives on Fairgrounds Road, so the next time you drive by, just do this. All right, look at the farmland on the left and the right. This is part of what a community is. We're trying to get to know people, a little bit of their background, and when that happens, you sometimes share. And we shed a tear together, or we laugh together, and that's okay. That is okay.
Yeah.
So until next time, thank you, everyone. What's the last thing I say? Keep taking the pictures. Put labels on them. Who are those people in those pictures? And if there's a story, then give us a story as well, because future generations are going to say thank you. You want to wave to them, Charlie?
Thank you.